wonderful company here in Pittsburgh at this time. Just know that feels like really beautiful things have happened to you, and so many Pittsburghers were in the cold.
Yeah.
0 degrees and came on out, okay? Which is, for some reason, surprising. I think when I was younger, like Pittsburgh was super cold and tough. I was like, yeah, we're Pittsburghers. We'll go out any, doesn't matter. 20 feet, we're out there. And then like in recent years, it's been kind of like, nah, it's cold. We're gonna stay in. So it's nice to have you guys come out and be here. So welcome back to Pittsburgh. So you told a really great story in the beginning when Jim asked where did this idea come from. So I wondered if we could start there.
My company was performing at BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music and the Next Wave Festival. And another connection is we were doing a piece called Love Songs that actually started and incorporated into that performance a piece called Love Stories that I made in this studio on the dance alloy, and Michelle was in the cast. So all kind of Pittsburghian connections, if that's a word. So I was performing this piece that was in part based on the piece that I did for the dance alloy. And there was, right after the show, literally right after the show, this commercial meeting Broadway producer came up to me and said, I have the material from this unfinished music, an unfinished musical that a guy named Billy Strayhorn and a guy named Luther Henderson wrote together in 1956, and it's called Rose-Colored Glasses, and I'm looking for someone to finish writing it and direct it and choreograph it. And to his credit, he had approached Bill T, maybe one other person, so he was actually really looking for someone not from the Broadway world, but from the postmodern dance world to do something different with it. He had gotten the script because, now I really don't know if anyone in here will remember, you guys are so young, but I'm the only old one here, that in the 80s, Lena Horne had a musical on Broadway called Lena Horne, the Lady and Her Music, and it was a sensation. It was absolutely, I saw it twice. She was phenomenal, but it was more than just, it was not the Lena Horne that you know from the movies. That was kind of the point of it all. She was herself, the stories were amazing, and it went from no one would touch this material to this huge Broadway hit. Well, that's how Michael Frazier, this producer, produced that show for Lena Horne. Lena Horne was Billy Strayhorn's life partner. They both say, except that he was queer. The plumbing didn't work, but I think that was what she used to say. But they both acknowledged that they were literally life partners. She says she was the love of my life. He says she was the love of my life. And when Michael Frazier produced Lena Horne's Broadway show, she said, I've got this Billy Strayhorn material I'd like for you to somehow work on next. She introduced him to the Billy Strayhorn family who are here in Pittsburgh, and then he brought that show to me in 1996. I started working on it in 1997. I would say it was probably a 3-year process, a workshop in New York, Center Theater Group in LA came on as a co-commissioner. It was going to premiere in Detroit, and for a lot of different reasons, it didn't make it to the stage. It was a really great experience. I have nothing but the best experiences from that. It was probably the tamest I've ever been, and it was probably still a little too out there. But I remember thinking, this has been an amazing experience, but I think I want to come back to Billy Strayhorn's music one day and not be constrained by any artistic concerns and just do something with it on my own terms. Because I fell in love with Billy Strayhorn, the man, and what he represented and who he is as part of the process of making Rose-Colored Glasses. And so actually we started this piece about 4 years ago. It felt like the time for me to return to Billy Strayhorn and again do it on my own terms. So it started in 1996 was the seeds were planted, and then here we are in 2019, and Pittsburgh, of all places, his hometown, in the theater named after him.
Yeah.
And Gene Kelly.
And yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why when I first heard about the project, I didn't even ask any questions. I didn't. Usually I would want to know, you know, well, what's the concept and how big's the company and what's the budget size and, you know, all kinds of very important questions. And this time I was like, oh yeah, totally. And Sophie's like, well, you know, send me more information. And it's like, it's okay. It made complete sense. I'm curious, you said you know, fell in love with Billy Strayhorn, who he is in the story. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah, that's a really great question, because then I was thinking to myself, even when I was eating, why now? Like, why did I come back to this piece now and not before and not 5 years from now? And I think that when I started this piece, when I started working with Billy Strayhorn's music in '96, I think it was in 1994 or '5, I think it was late 1994, that a biography of Billy Strayhorn by a guy named David Hadu came out called Lush Life. And so the first place that I went when I started my research was to that biography. And I immediately fell in love. For those of you who don't know Billy Strayhorn, he wrote A Train, Lush Life, oh gosh, on and on and on. You'll see them, hear them all, and see them dance. UMMG, My Little Brown Book, just so many jazz classics. And he co-wrote some of those, and he legally single-authored some of those. But he does it with Duke Ellington. He was Duke Ellington's main, of all the collaborators in Duke Ellington's lifetime, Billy Strayhorn, as arranger and also composer, was his main collaborator. But the thing is, Billy Strayhorn was gay and out and living with his partners in Harlem in the late 30s to his death in 1960. And so for someone to be out publicly, I mean, they lived together. They didn't go under the cloak of we're brothers or good friends. We're husbands, and that was life-threatening in 1940. And so, what the biography of Lush Life, what David Hadu put forward, was the thought that, well, maybe in order to live his personal public profile and notoriety that Duke Ellington could have. So there is a thought that on some level, consciously or subconsciously, either he consciously said, I'll stay in the background and live my personal truth, or he realized he couldn't have the profile and live his personal truth. Right. And so the whole issue of is life about fame, or is it about integrity? Is it about creating these works of genius, or is it about being known for creating these works of genius? And Duke Ellington is quite well known for the legally Strayhorn-Ellington body of work, and also the Strayhorn body of work. One example is that A Train is the signature song of Duke Ellington's orchestra, of his career, and that has never been contested. That's always been single-authored by Billy Strayhorn. So that's Ellington's #1 song. Everyone says Duke Ellington, and they start with A Train. That was always legally published as Billy Strayhorn, so that's his music with someone else's face attached to it. And you could see by the end of Strayhorn's life, as much as he said it didn't bother him, that he drank and smoked himself to death. So clearly there were a lot of really harsh and conflicting emotions eating away at his insides. And so that whole story to me is so resonant. But I have to say, I think that for me, art, any whether it's a Toni Morrison novel or a Pina Bausch piece or Black Panther, a film, I see like 3 different levels
and one is like what's happening, what's the narrative, what's pushing this dance piece forward. Then you have like what's the subtext, what's really beneath the words, what's really beneath the movement. But then there's this bigger arc as well. What is this whole thing about? Why did the choreographer make this piece? Why did the writer write this book? Why did she write Beloved? And Toni Morrison's very good about talking about that big arc. And I'm kind of a big arc kind of guy.
Yeah, me too.
And so it was his story, but even more, it was what does that life represent? And as I've gotten older, I'm 59 now, and I have to stop and think because past 50 you forget, but it's 59. And the fewer years you have in front of you, you do start to think about, well, what does legacy mean? Yeah. I've always been a what's the meaning of life guy. Even as a kid, I remember as a 4-year-old kind of going, why are we on this planet? What's this Jesus thing?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So I think that as I've gotten older, those questions around the meaning of life and death, legacy, purpose, have become even stronger and stronger and stronger. And what's entered into the picture now is kind of legacy. I don't have any kids. Right. Just divorced after 26 years. And so all these things are happening, and you kind of go, well, what is legacy and what is life ultimately about? And those are the questions that are at the heart of Billy Strayhorn's story. Mm-hmm. It's the bigger picture. It really is, he did create this genius body of work. And does it really matter if no one knows the music? Or is literally he's presenting what is life about? Is it about your personal truth? Or is it about fame and fortune? And no coincidence that we have who we have in the White House, and no diss on the Kardashians, but because I watch that show sometimes. But it's so much of that's clearly about fame for fame's sake. Like that has become the goal. It's just skip talent, just skip meaning. It's about fame versus
David,
meaning.
You're about to take us down an ugly road. Because this is definitely, we talk about this a lot here, and in Pittsburgh we've got this thing that some people know and talk about called Pittsburgh famous, where people get super caught up in wanting to be known.
Don't I hear you?
Recognized, have a couple of funders call their name out at an event, and they're like, I've arrived, and everybody's like, they've arrived. And then you look at the work, and it's like, So we could go really deep. The way it's cracking up, but he knows what I'm talking about. Pittsburgh people, you guys know what I'm talking about? Okay. So, and I'm sure that's not unique to our city, but I do think because it is a small city and because we do have lots of funders and it is kind of tight and comfortable, that maybe it sort of gets amplified in a different way. But this question of, okay, where is the talent and where does your energy go as an art maker?
Exactly.
Is it you're gonna spend 80-90% of your time on the work and let the 10% be telling people you made the work or having other people recognize and acknowledge you? Or are you gonna spend 10% of the time on the work and spend 90% of the time on the story about who you are?
Yeah.
And what is that balance?
That's such great questions, boy.
We struggle with that.
Yeah.
Even as an organization here, because we spend energy on the work, and people are like, but the story. Right. So, for me, you talk about falling in love with Billy Strayhorn. Before I worked here, I knew Strayhorn's music because my father's a musician, so I went to many a jam session, many a jazz club.
Wow.
And so I knew the music, but I didn't know the person. I didn't know the story.
Right.
And then when I started here 10 years ago, the first gift I got was David Roussève's book.
Oh, that's
a gift from actually the board chair at the time.
Wow.
And I read it, and I had that same I mean, I felt a lot of sadness reading that book.
Yeah.
Because I know that story of really beautiful, amazing people doing incredible work that, it's not that it goes under-acknowledged, because musicians know Strayhorn. You know, his people knew who he was and know his music and celebrate it. But like in the broader community, it's sort of undervalued. I grew up with that story, like family, friends, and our artists. So that felt very sad for me. And so I decided that this place that had his name on it had to be a place where people could have a voice and have those stories.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So the idea of KST being a presenting organization, like, for me, we had to do that because we have Billy Strayhorn and Gene
That's such
Kelly
a beautiful story, actually.